Welcome. This is Latin as a Language by Athenia Gonzalez and Joseph Dames. So, introduction to topic. The topic that this presentation will be covering is the extinction of languages, specifically on what a dead language is and how it affects us as a society. So, a dead language is a language that is no longer spoken and has no native speakers. And native speakers are those who are born and raised speaking that language. Languages are grown and shared through the act of communication, and when one has no speakers, meaning when a language has no speakers, then it cannot be shared or developed, hence why they die out. Dead languages are an extremely important part of history, as many of them shape the world as we know it, the most significant being Latin. There are many linguists in the world that work hard on preserving languages that are on the verge of extinction, which are known as endangered languages.
Introduction to Latin as a dead language. Latin is a language that has been around for upwards of 2,700 years, split into different ages. It was considered to be in its most purest form in the years 509 BCE to 27 BCE during the Roman Republic, and 27 BCE to 476 CE in the Roman Republic era. After this time, the Roman Empire started to fall off, and eventually, with new social classes and education levels arising, the language fragmented and variation of the language started to appear. As the years went on after the Roman Empire split, the language kept changing as all the speakers of it split off and started creating their own variation. Each one kept evolving until we ended up with the Romance languages we have now. Is Latin actually a dead language? That's up for debate, as some people say it's just been changed over time. Latin is basically a more complicated version of the languages it's evolved into over many years: Spanish, French, Portuguese, English, etc. The Latin letter C was pronounced like an English W, and C was pronounced like K. So Romance language speakers like us could pick out a few words here and there from the Latin language. Latin used to have many different complicated endings, which Latin speakers eventually got rid in lieu of wanting a simpler language. Don't finish that part. Which is why our Romance languages don't have dozens of complicated endings like original Latin did. We should be grateful. So, why is Latin still important? Latin is still important because it is the root of the languages we speak. It's a gateway to the Romance languages. I'm sure anyone that studies these languages has studied Latin as it's being one of the roots of the languages. More than half of the English language words derive from Latin, so that's something interesting if anyone wants to study that or not. It is also the official language for the Catholic Church, and much medical terminology also comes from Latin. So if you're Catholic or whatnot, I'm sure you guys probably know some of the words.
So the next topic is, why is the preservation of languages important? So the preservation of languages is extremely important because of the fact that the death of a language is not just the death of words, grammar, and the alphabet that is used to speak or create the language, but it is the death of the entire culture in which the language is used to speak in. This is because the way we communicate with each other using languages is what creates who we are and what our culture is. The death of a language completely stops this flow between the people in a culture, which eventually kills the culture. This is because of the fact that we communicate our ideas and who we are through our language, whether that's ASL for people who don't speak or any type of language. The best way to understand it is by imagining the unique ways you express yourself in your native language and how they do not translate the same in other languages. And now imagine never being able to express yourself in that way again. So what I mean by this is every language has their own specific terminology that can't be translated 100% to other languages. So an example of a language that has died is the Ainu language. Although there are millions of languages that have died throughout the years and thousands are endangered all over the world today as people speak less and people die out, the Ainu culture is an example of a culture that suffered death after its language died. Ainu people are indigenous to northern Japan and parts of Russia, who historically spoke the Ainu language. The language began to decline after a combination of colonial policies, discrimination, and assimilation efforts by the Japanese government after they wanted all people to sort of speak Japanese and not have any issues within segregation, but this eventually killed off the Ainu culture because the language died. So the last Ainu speaker was a woman named Umeko Mura, who passed away in 1994. However, there have been multiple efforts to revive the language and to revitalize the cultural identity of the Ainu people in Japan and other parts of the world, as the Ainu language is being taught in some schools in the country. So Father Foster is a case study I found. He conducted his study in 1969. He's an American priest who worked for the Vatican as the chief Latinist. He dedicated his time to preserving the use of Latin in not only the church but the modern world as well. That's a picture of him on the right. He translated hundreds of papal encyclicals, decrees, and other official church documents into Latin for the Pope. So the Pope couldn't understand the ancient Latin Catholic papers that the church has used for hundreds of years, and Father Foster was the one who would translate all of the papers for him and for the Vatican. He offered Latin classes to Roman tourists and locals in order to push his motive of preserving the language and to get people to understand that Latin is a nice language and that they should know it. So his mission was to preserve the language due to the connection it has with ancient Catholic culture and the way he felt that Latin was like no other language.
Hey guys, question 1. Would you guys consider Latin to be a dead language or just an evolved language? Me, I feel like, so I know there's like different terminology. I feel like based on your knowledge on this, I mean, I'm just a college student, but now really no one speaks it anymore, but technically it is just an evolved language. Like, it's just been a language that's been evolved over time, so technically you could consider it like English is just like Latin evolved, but technically we don't call English Latin. I would honestly say it's a dead language, but that's up to debate. It just depends how you view it, how professionals and how all these people view it. I'm not a professional, but how could learning Latin benefit you, being that you're a Romance language speaker? So does it benefit you in the way of maybe learning the history of your language? Maybe if you're going into the medical field? I don't know, just maybe if you want to know more about your language's roots, go ahead and study Latin.
So to sort of wrap things up, our last question is, if you could bring back one dead language and make it widely spoken again, which one would you choose and why? This can be based on wherever you're from or whatever type of things you're interested in, because literally you can search up any region and dead languages and there would be more than 50 to choose from. And then the second part of the question is, how do you think it would impact culture or modern society today if the dead language was back and it had never died? So for example, if Latin, even though we now know it's not really a dead language, that question is debatable. If we were to have brought back Latin and Father Foster succeeded and we spoke it widely instead of English per se, how would that impact culture or modern society? And then here we have our works cited. Thank you so much.
Conclusions: the endangerment of the Latin language ultimately began with the downfall of Rome, as they were the main speakers of this language. After they split up and new variation was created all over, the original language died. It formed into Romance languages we all know and love now, and still has some beneficial reasons to learning the language. Even with it not being a common language to speak anymore, it is still used and referenced in the modern day.